Hello, Elwood City Limits listeners. It's Will here, and it's time once again for the 13th time. We are giving you our season recap of the Arthur season that was. You're on the Episodic Arthur podcast. So if this is your first time listening to one of these, this is something we do at the end of every Arthur season, where Lucas and I do a separate recording, and on our own, we talk about our feelings overall on the season that was, and give our picks for the top 5 episodes of the season. So thank you very much for joining us. I want to just put it out there first off that there is going to be a double offering of ECL content this week, both here and on our Patreon page. So, of course, you're getting the ECL season recap, wrap up. I kind of got caught between those two. Wrap up, recap, whatever you want to call it. You're getting that free of charge. At the end of this recording, you're going to hear an extended preview of what we have on the Patreon, and that is going to be a review of the final Arthur episode, All Grown Up. Lucas and I talked about it for what ended up being an hour, which was way longer than I thought we were going to go. We have a lot to say, and you'll get to hear a little bit of it at the end when Lucas and I are finished our picks. And then if you like what you hear, all you do is go over to patreon.com/Elwood City Limits. All you have to do is plunk down $1, and you'll be able to hear it right away. It's a good one, so I would recommend that if you're interested, come on over, and then you can check out all the other cool stuff we have over on Patreon. So season 13, it got off to a little bit of a weird start. Of course, one of the show's biggest guest stars. And it's funny how the further we get away from talking about the beginning of a season, the more it's like, I can't believe that happened. And yeah, Philip Seymour Hoffman, eh? That was wild. I'm so glad that we kept the show going because I loved Lucas's reaction to the whole thing. Now, we had some ones in there. You know, there's definitely, I'm just even looking at the episode chart. I know which ones were the weaker ones, and there were a few of them, but there were also some all-timers in this one. There are some episodes in this season that are still remembered today, and so, I mean, obviously, I'm going to bring those up in a little bit, and you had some hidden gems in there as well. I think stuff like The Pride of Lakewood is one that doesn't really get talked about that much, but I was glad to finally get filled in. It seems like it has a soft spot in the hearts of many Arthur fans. And there's a couple of others that I had never heard about before that are definitely making it on my list. It's kind of hard to judge an Arthur season as a whole because it's so, there's hardly usually a through line or anything. There isn't like a unifying theme or like an overarching storyline. And it is just like 20 little stories, 20 12-minute stories. So at the end, I mean, of course, we had fun talking about it. I would say this one is a little bit like middle plus is what I would, and even that doesn't feel fair because when this season, there we go, was good, it was great. When it wasn't so good, it was very forgettable. And that's kind of where we are at with Arthur. But I'm hoarding these seasons as much as possible, because I know that before too long, we're going to be entering into a new era of Arthur that is completely unlike anything that Lucas or I have ever dealt with. And of course, I'm referring to the Flash animation seasons. Things are going to get way different. So it still feels like old Arthur to me, which, you know me, I'm probably the oldest person who listens to this podcast. Well, one of them. I know we have some listeners who are older than me, who are big Arthur fans as well. But sometimes I feel like very much the elder statesman of like, yes, I watched season 1 when it aired, of course, when I was 6 years old or however old I was. So I know that I have a tendency to be more complimentary of the older seasons, season 1 especially. But there is still a lot of good to be had, and it's really awesome when we come across an episode that is just, all-time good. So let me talk about them a little bit. Let's get into my top 5 for season 13. Number 5. There were a couple of stories / episodes that I feel could have gone here, and I decided to go with Fernlets by Fern. Now, of course, one of our earlier complaints, not complaints, but just like, oh, I wish they would do this, was that they would use the side characters more. And this is another season where I feel like we are really using all of the side characters quite a bit. And Fern got like at least 2 stories. That was awesome. This one was way better. Kung Fu, one of my least favorite of the seasons. But Fernlets by Fern was a really interesting one to explore Fern's writerly side, and I liked the sneaky critique of capitalism that made a lot of sense for Fern's character. It wasn't, I don't think it's an all-timer, but I do think it is, I can be a little hot and cold on Fern episodes, to be honest with you. Sometimes, I don't know. Sometimes they kind of go off in directions that I'm not crazy about, considering that Fern is one of my favorite characters. But this one was definitely more of my speed. So, good Fern episode is my number 5. Number 4, no acting, please. I mean, how could I not? This was so cool that we got to have this. Another Fern episode. And it makes a lot of sense that she would be next to Philip Seymour Hoffman. Just one of the best guest spots in Arthur history. And we've had some good guests, not just like some cool stunt voice, but we've also had like good actors play characters. And this was a good actor playing a character. Of course, R.I.P. to Philip Seymour Hoffman, but he made it very memorable, but he also served the episode. He didn't steal it, you know what I mean? He made it so that his presence was both memorable and helped the episode itself be memorable. Like, I remember what happens in that episode mostly because of how good he was at serving the story. Just a real treat, that one. And I smile whenever I think about it. Number 3, I wonder if this might be a little bit controversial, considering the heap of feedback that we have gotten for it and that we continue to get for it. When Carl Met George. This is one of those ones that's like, people remember this now. People still think about this. And keep in mind, the episodes airing in this season are over a decade old. We're only just getting into the 2010s. And this one, April 5th of 2010 is when this aired. I have the episode guide in front of me. I don't just remember that. They really, I remember, like, we certainly talked about this in the episode, and we've talked about this across several pieces of content. But I appreciate the effort, I suppose. They didn't get it completely right, but it's also important to consider it within its own context of the time. And I really appreciate that they tried, and I think that that's a lot of what you all were saying in your emails and in your messages, were that it didn't get everything completely right. In fact, there were some things that it kind of got wrong. But at the same time, there's a trust that you place in the show Arthur to tackle these kinds of issues with I don't want to say kid gloves, but with a softer touch, maybe, that is meant to bring a better degree of understanding to the mind of a kid or even just a person watching it. I could see somebody older having a better understanding of an autistic person or a person on the autism spectrum's life after this. It just can't really end here. This is it's only 12 minutes, you know? It can't be a complete database, and no person on the spectrum is the same. You know, they are all people. So they're all different people. And this is just one very specific example. Now, I hope that Carl does come back at some point. I believe that he does to some degree, but it was an admirable try, I think. It was an admirable first step, and my hope would be that they don't stop. Now, I don't know if, you know, this subject is broached ever again. It would be really nice if it was. I'm not exactly going to hold my breath, though, but for what it was, I appreciated that they created a character who is very likable, and they gave it to George. And George, I think, is a character who goes along with understanding other people's perspectives. So, quality-wise, I actually might say that I like No Acting Please better than When Carl Met George, but I think When Carl Met George is such a lightning rod for discussion that I think it warrants a number 3 spot. Number 2, the secret origin of Supernova, the biggest surprise of the season, and one of my favorite Arthur episodes in recent memory where we are on the timeline. So imaginative, so creative. I mean, as a comic book fan myself, I was very entertained, and I felt heard in a way. We had a post recently on our social media that Arthur's character Supernova seems to be visually based off of the DC heroes Adam Strange and Starman. And somebody on our Instagram also said that he kind of resembles the Marvel character Nova, but they managed to create a fairly good original design that's, inspired by a couple of different things. Allegedly, this is all just me kind of looking at it. But it was also just a really great celebration of the imagination. I maybe, you know what, maybe it spoke to me because when I was younger, and I have a couple of superhero OCs still knocking around in my head that I've always wanted to do something with, but that's a whole other story. But I really appreciated the idea of creating your own superhero, creating your own mythology, and then having the confidence to embody that superhero in a way. And of course, the whole thing of Arthur being jaded by rampant commercialism, who could have seen that coming? I was so tickled by it. And it's something that I think that I went through as in my 20s, And to see Arthur go through it at 8 was just like, wow, it feels like they were talking to a much older me. So this is definitely one that grows with you in a way, in a weird way that a lot of Arthur episodes almost don't. I don't know. I just really, really loved this episode. But of course, I don't think it could have been anything other than this for number 1, The Great McGrady. It's one of the classic Arthur message episodes. They gave it the whole 22 minutes to breathe, and I'm glad that they did. It's something that is really important to talk about for kids. Again, approaching a subject that is a part of normal human life with a very soft touch. They're not going to do any big dramatic swings. There's not going to be any sort of tear jerker or something. It really is much more slice of life. It's Mrs. McGrady has a cancer diagnosis. Here's how it affects the kids in different ways, much like the April 9th episode. And they gave that a lot of time to breathe as well. And what I also appreciate is the effort they put in to still make that episode relevant today by making all of those supplementary materials that you can access online, because this has an evergreen message of there is no one right way to feel when a loved one has cancer. And it led to one of my favorite discussions on the show of how well this represented the phenomenon of having a loved one who is sick with cancer. And thankfully, because it's a cartoon, you can end it in a much more positive way. There didn't need to be any tragedy. There didn't need to be any sadness. And really, that was nice in and of itself. And it was great to see Mrs. McGrady after that episode with her full head of hair and still as vivacious as ever. So I think they really did themselves a great service here. People still remember this episode for all the best reasons. And I can't imagine how, don't get me wrong, the Supernova episodes spoke to me a lot, but it's hard to argue that The Great McGrady should be number 1 of the season. So there you go. We're going to be entering into a brand new season once again. I'm really, really excited. I'm excited for what we're gonna see, and I'm excited for what Lucas is going to say about season 13. So yeah, in just a second, we're going to head it over to Lucas, and he's going to give his top 5 of the season and any extra thoughts that he might have. Then we're going to take a quick break, and then after that break, you're going to get an extended preview of the ECL Patreon exclusive review of All Grown Up. The little preview that I put in there has to do with some general thoughts about what we thought about the end of the show, and we get into the animal hierarchy. Now, we also go in depth in the full episode about all of the looks, all of where everybody ended up, and there's some hot takes near the end of that one. So again, if you want to check it out, patreon.com/Elwood City Limits, or you can check out the preview and enjoy the rest of the season 13 recap. All right, Lucas, how was season 13 for you?
Hello, good evening. This is a special after hours solo Elwood City Limits recording. I'm, of course, Lucas. Hello. Hope you've been well. Hope everything's peachy keen. We're talking Season 13, Arthur, 2010. Long after I stopped watching the series. This is all new to me. And going back and I listened to some of the episodes we recorded, and at least kind of to remind myself of my own thoughts about it and how I felt, and I was like, geez, not a lot of episodes in this here Season 13 where I was like, I loved it, There was episodes, of course, that I really enjoyed, but no super standout home run, remarkable, big-hitting Arthur episodes. And it makes me wonder. I hope Season 14 has something that maybe blows my hair back a little bit more, that's a little bit more spectacular. But I think this will be an interesting top 5, because I have a feeling, going back and listening to these episodes and me and Will's thoughts, that me and Will are probably going to have completely different top 5s. In fact, this might be the most different our top 5s oh my god, I can't even talk, you guys, it's so late. This might be the most different our top 5s end up being, considering from just listening to me and Will's thoughts back, what they end. And I know you guys are probably curious. Okay, Lucas, what are your top 5 episodes? Get to it. Stop blabbing. Asking you shall receive. Patience is a virtue. Let's get into it. Number 5, we just talked about this. The Secret Origin of Supernova. I have a feeling this might be number 1 on Will's list. And just because it's number 5 doesn't mean I didn't like it. I really liked this episode as well. I think this is one of those Arthur episodes where, even though the moral is intended for 8-year-olds, a lot of people I know could take a thing or two from this episode. Just because a product has your favorite character plastered all over it does not mean you need to buy it, folks. And it doesn't mean that you need to just blindly consume and, dive headfirst into fandom at the detriment to your life. And so I liked those kind of sentiments and the kind of anti-consumerist sentiment that was expressed in this episode. And at the same time, I liked how creative the episode was. Lots of original superhero characters. You can tell the writers were really having fun with it. And that fun came through in the episode. Number 4! Arthur's Number Nightmare. This was actually on the other end of the season. This was one of the earlier episodes we talked about this season. Really good example of an episode that wasn't an ensemble episode, but was kind of juggling an Arthur A plot with a Buster and Francine B plot. I like how paranoid and crazy everyone's acting in this episode. I liked lots of good Mr. Haney comedy in this episode. And there wasn't a lot of Mr. Haney comedy this season, so if you want Mr. Haney comedy, which I always do, guys, this is the one to watch. Number 3, speaking of paranoia, Prunella and the Haunted Locker. I liked this one quite a bit more than Will. I thought it was a good use of Prunella as the most superstitious character, and I liked watching this mystery unfold. I thought this episode was legitimately creepy at moments. I liked seeing Elwood City in the 50s, and I liked seeing the Elwood City class in the 70s. I was surprised by how kind of legitimately a little bit spooky and unsettling I found this episode, given how innocuous I found horror-themed Arthur episodes in the past. Number 2, this one really, really took me by surprise. Definitely the most surprising episode of the season. Paradise Lost. One of, if not the best Pal and Kate episodes ever. And it's also great because it's like a logical end to the Kate and Pal saga. When we first started this episode, I groaned. I was like, oh my gosh, another Kate and Pal episode. And then I was like, oh, this is like the Kate and Pal episode with the highest stakes we've ever seen. Because Kate is having to adjust and learn the lesson of she's not going to be able to talk to Pal anymore. And I liked the end of this episode and the conclusion. It didn't just have this like very one-note happy ending. Instead, it was a lot more nuanced. And it was about Kate growing up and coming to the realization that, you have to enjoy those happy moments while you can. And you can't just cling on to your youth, or you can't cling on to these things that are impermanent, because that's going to make you unhappy. And instead, you have to accept that, all good things must come to an end. And so I thought this was actually a really dense, well-done episode. Sorry if you guys can hear my cat meowing in the background. Number one episode of this season, Fernlets by Fern. A great Fern and Muffy episode. Great utilization of two of the more underrated, underutilized characters, especially Fern, but also Muffy. It's always nice to see Muffy in a positive light. And it's one of those Arthur episodes, much like The Secret Origin of Supernova, with a transcendent moral. This is an episode that has become more relevant by the passage of time, not less, with hustle culture and the gig economy and side hustles. And this episode is about sometimes doing things just because you do enjoy them. Doing things for you and not having to turn everything into a side hustle. And it's a really applicable episode to our time, because look at this show. Elwood City Limits is in a way a side hustle. But the only reason I do it, I can't speak for Will, but I do it because I enjoy it. And the second I stop enjoying it, I wouldn't do it. But you guys all make it way worthwhile and definitely worth doing. So we're going to do it till we finish Arthur, of course. But I wouldn't do it without you guys. So I thank you for that. But I also thank this episode for being, great Fern and Muffy moments, great utilization of those characters, and definitely the best moral of this season. And with that, that's my top 5 episodes. I know I'm going to get called out for not putting the Great McGrady on here, but Lance Armstrong ruined it for me. I don't know what to tell you guys. I don't like Lance Armstrong's inclusion in that episode. So it didn't work as well. What can I say? That's my hot take this season. And I can't wait to talk about next season. And also, if you didn't already, if you aren't subscribed to the Patreon, check out me and Will's talk about All Grown Up, the final Arthur episode. I think it's one of the best things me and Will have ever done when it comes to this show. So if you haven't been a Patreon subscriber yet, and you're interested to hear, what did me and Will think about? Sure, everybody can listen to season 13. What do me and Will think about the end of all of Arthur, season 25? You can hear that right now at the Elwood City Limits Patreon, and I think it's a really, really excellent conversation. So if you like our stuff, check it out, and I will see you folks next week, whatever that means. All right, Lucas, over and out.
This podcast is supported by listeners like you, and here's how. Over on our social networks, you can follow us and find the latest updates and some fun photos. Facebook.com/Elwood City Limits, at ECL Podcast on Twitter, ElwoodCityLimits.tumblr.com, and Elwood City Limits on Instagram. You can support us monetarily by going over to patreon.com/Elwood City Limits. If you become a patron for as little as $1 a month, you get access to exclusive audio content like our new PBS Kids show, movie reviews, and sneak previews of upcoming content. Support us as well by going to teespring.com/stores/Elwood-City-Limits-store or search Elwood City Limits on Teespring. Buy yourself a t-shirt, a tank top, or a hoodie with the Elwood City Limits logo or an exclusive design by our friend Josh. Elwood City Limits is available online at libsyn.com/Elwood City Limits, or you can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. Is it not on your favorite app? Let us know, and you can always help us by spreading the word, tell your friends, and send us a message either on social media or an email, elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. Thank you so much for your continued support. And now, let's get back to the show.
4, 3, 2, 1. Every birthday, my mom and dad would say, you're another year older, another year wiser, but I still go to school to get an education. I do each and every day like a mini vacation. All grown up, I really want to shout it out. All grown up, I want the world to know. All grown up, I really want to shout it out. All grown up with you. All grown up with you.
I think you're right to point out the fact that they're working under several guns at this point. Not only was it made a decision that it's like, okay, season 25, you got to put an end on it, and you're not getting a special. You're not getting an hour-long episode. You're not getting 30 minutes to wrap it up. You're getting 12, and it's like that's got to be tough for writer Peter Hirsch or director Peter Hirsch or the writers on the episode or anyone else. And what's more, they are writing it on a several-year delay. So I believe the production for this season and the couple before it ended in 2019.
Wow, so we missed an opportunity to have Arthur end with everybody getting coronavirus, the pandemic hitting.
Well, yeah, which means that it's a little bit more evergreen because it doesn't address those, but it's also like a lot changes in 3 years, and there's a very specific example of where that kind of ends up biting them, in my opinion. So there's a lot of grace you have to give this because of what was going on and the way that it was made and just what they were given. And so I think that they really did the best that they could to have it in this way. It's just hard to not be like, I wish it could be different. So I when I say that, I don't mean it to be accusatory or being like they f***ed it up or something, but
they ruined my Arthur.
Yeah, it's like no, it's like they didn't, and I think that's really the first time that you see the episode, it can be hard to catch some of this stuff, and like it's really reactive. But the second time, this was the second time watching it for me, you get to realize that they put as much in there as they could to let you know that like they like this show as much as you do. Mm-hmm. So we mentioned some of the references. I took some of them down. You get to see Patrick's Chocolate Shop for one more time. You get to see the Mrs. Fink kid have like a line that doesn't want to make you pull your hair out. We see Alex Davidson, the character that we called Frank for a long time that didn't really have much of a name. We see Buster using his inhaler. When they play that Oscar the Oracle Octopus game, some of the questions, and I said this at the time, sound like the ones that they were doing in the Popular Girls episode from like the Girls magazine.
Yes, and even Muffy comments, this game is so retro, which I thought was a fun callback. I recognize that as well.
And Martin Spivak was that kind of fake boyfriend that Buster imagined for his mother was on the elevator in Francine's dream. So just a few little things like these remind you that the people working on this remember all this stuff because they've been here since the beginning. And it felt very much like, very much a tip of the cap. So even though, they might have made some decisions that you don't agree with, I think it's just the fact that they have been there for so long and they have this stuff in their heads. Like, they've had this in their heads for as long as we have, if not longer. So it means that they really wanted to do this as right as they could. So the idea tying the episode together is that, they go to the library and they find this old board game, ostensibly. I mentioned Oscar the Oracle Octopus, and it's a game that can apparently predict your future. And that's where we get the spin-off of, we get some potential futures for Arthur, Buster, for Buster, Francine, and Muffy. And then we get their actual futures at the very end. So first of all, like half of the episode is in the library. We get an appearance from Mark Brown.
Yeah, who's immediately recognizable. You see him actually in the opening title card. And I was like, oh, that's Mark Brown. And yeah, Mark Brown is in the episode not only to tell them that the librarian is down in the stacks, and that's how they find the board game. But later on, near the very end of the episode, Arthur has accidentally taken out a book he didn't intend to take out, a book on how to draw animals, which there's lots of stuff in this episode, Will, about the animal hierarchy.
Whoa.
That's one question. Not only do they choose not to answer, but instead they chose to sow it with even more confusing seeds. And maybe we'll get to that in a second, but continuing on with Mark Brown. Mark Brown is actually kind of the impetus to completely change the trajectory of Arthur's life. Because as the fates would have it, Arthur ends up becoming a graphic novelist who writes a graphic novel called Arthur about all of their childhoods when they're 8 years old. And the implication is that the reason he did that is because he got into drawing animals, animal hierarchy. Because Mark Brown told him, hey, that's a pretty good book. There's some good animal drawings in there. You should read it.
So
I thought that was cute that, like, Arthur is who he is because of his author.
And this is that was a question that I believe was echoed in the Discord and possibly elsewhere. Is Mark Brown playing like God, essentially? Like, he is the invisible hand that has steered Arthur's life, and now he's steering it once more. Like, is he a godlike figure here?
I really don't know. I think, it's interesting because in interviews with Mark Brown, the Arthur character he himself has said, he's most similar to is Arthur. So I like the choice of, Arthur's life kind of mirrors Mark Brown's to an extent in that he ends up creating a maybe famous, we don't know actually how well that graphic novel works out for him, but a famous series of novels. Now, is the Mark Brown character the Arthur come to manifest? I really don't know. It could be either way. I in this series, he's not Mark Brown, right? They're not like famous author Mark Brown has come to Elwood City. It's not like the other celebrity cameos.
No, it's played very coy, and they did so on social media as well. They're just like, they never named him, but it's just like, well, if you know what Mark Brown looks like when he sounds like, if you know, you know, yeah.
Should we talk about the animal hierarchy before we move on? Let's talk about the animal hierarchy really quick.
You brought it up. So I'll just list a couple of things here. So Arthur accidentally borrows. You're right. It's like the setup for the episode is like, when you don't get what you expected, but it turns out great anyway. That's the line that Arthur uses in the cold open, and to me that was like, you're not going to get what you expected from the futures of the characters, but it turns out great anyway. Which to me was just like, listen, please calm down. Like,
take a deep breath.
It'll all be okay.
Please put the keyboard down.
Yeah. So instead he accidentally takes out a book of how to draw animals. We get a line from Buster. I wrote this down. This shows you how to draw an aardvark. I never knew their faces were so long. It's kind of revisited when Arthur, like when we skip forward in time, and Arthur just says, about why he decided to, become a graphic novelist. I just like drawing animals.
Yes. Okay. That was the other moment where it's like,
yeah,
I just like drawing. So this is to the point where it feels almost intentionally contradictory, right? Yeah. Because me and you have really been going over this animal hierarchy for years now, with a fine-tooth comb. But Arthur's always operated under an internal logic that they never refer to each other as animals. They always call themselves people, right?
Or at least not with any consistency. It's usually people unless, Buster wants to refer to himself as a bunny.
Right.
Or like, yeah.
It
flip-flops.
So as beings, they call themselves people. Like across the board, they're all people. Whereas the animal thing is treated more like race or something. Like they'll be like, oh, it's a great day for ducks. And there's like duck guys or whatever. I was thinking about this. Has Arthur ever been referred to as an aardvark, or Arthur's family referred to as a family of aardvarks?
His family, not that I can remember. Arthur himself,
A-R-V-A-R-K.
Well, even that was like that. Like there was no reference made to the fact that that's what he is. It's just like it was just a word. Which, aardvark is a little difficult when you're a kid because you can easily forget that there are two A's at the beginning.
So,
but yeah, I don't think so. Like, I want to say no.
So they contradict this kind of established eternal logic in this very episode because we see the picture of the aardvark, and it's not a funny animal. It's like a regular aardvark. And, Buster's talking about how he, didn't even know aardvarks looked like that, which is kind of crazy because his best friend is one. But then I'm like, okay, maybe in the logic of this show, they're all people. But then, at the very end, when Arthur's talking about how he likes drawing animals, and remember, the reason he became a graphic novelist is because of this very animal book. Mm-hmm. He reveals his graphic novel, and it literally just looks like Arthur.
It's the first episode of the show.
It's the first episode of the show, exactly, which I thought was, again, a very good callback. Arthur getting his glasses. But he doesn't draw the animal like a non-funny animal, like a non-sentient aardvark, like the one that was in the book that he learned how to draw animals from. It looks just like Arthur. And then he's also like, I like drawing animals. So I think, Will, if we could use this opportunity, unless we see some other evidence, throughout the next few seasons of the show as we watch, if we want to come down on a conclusion when it comes to the animal hierarchy, it literally just doesn't make any sense. I don't think that there's any sort of... I would love to see if they have some sort of show Bible, you know what I mean, with like hard and fast rules. Like there was one going around for like Roadrunner, right? Where it's like Roadrunner has to always be on the road or else he wouldn't be a Roadrunner. What's the guy that's Wile E. Coyote has to always, be victim of his own devices. All the stuff always has to be from the Acme Corporation. These shows have hard and fast rules that are written down. And I wonder if there really is anything for the animal hierarchy other than just be really confusing when it comes to the difference between the bipedal animals and the non-bipedal animals. Because even in this own episode, there's no logical consistency to it. And that's, by the way, that's not a criticism. It's just something that we talk about all the time, and I think it's funny. It doesn't make the show any worse or anything like that.
Well, and I think that this is kind of where I feel like we differ from a lot of people in the animation community, where it's like, yes, we've had fun keeping this quote unquote question going all these years, and like we can still keep it going and point out the times where it doesn't make sense or it's a little funny, but because I think the real answer is that, like you kind of came to, Lucas, they kind of just do whatever they want, and like with all the fresh interviews that have been coming out in the wake of this episode or to promote this episode, I remember seeing one from Mark Brown that was essentially like, because some people have attributed Arthur himself to being black, to his family being black. And Mark Brown specifically saying that he could be. He doesn't want to come down he doesn't want to make that official. He doesn't want to rule that out because he personally likes the fact that the Arthur characters can be anyone. Anyone can relate to them, which is also another Twitter discourse that's going on right now with the release of that new Disney movie. But the fact that like they are colored differently because they are animals, but you can like other than the signifiers that they put in, like Brain's family celebrates Kwanzaa, Francine's family is Jewish, what have you. You can pretty much put on them what you think works for you, and you're right. So the answer is that there's not meant to be an answer, which is really frustrating and not fun to think about.
Well, that's the benefit of making them all animals, right? It gives them this Spider-Man-like quality. Stan Lee always said about Spider-Man, the reason it's such a universal character is that anybody can picture themselves under that mask. The mask totally covers his face, so it could be anybody, right? And by making them all animals, it's right. Like, no matter who you are, if you identify with the qualities of the Arthur characters, their personalities, or, the only thing that is very clear is their personalities, as well as, like you said, their religion in some cases, as well as their economic status, right? That was something that Arthur's always done really well, is showing people from different economic backgrounds interacting and stuff like that. And that's the beauty of Arthur, is it doesn't really matter who you are. If you find some things that are similar between you and the characters in terms of personality, you can very much identify with those characters. So I think it's an asset to the show rather than a hindrance.
Yes, it always has been. So I think the final thing to go over here is where everybody ends up. So I mentioned before that they have a couple.
And let's say I'll say this: it's take time, Will. I got takes. I know everybody wants to hear them. I got takes.